Hey, hi, Sabrina. Can you hear me?
Hello, yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So we'll start sharing.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Just a second. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay. And thank you for joining us today on our Lunch and Learn session. We'll talk to our customers or our prospects about the problems that they're facing and see if we can help them build something. And my name is Akshay, and I work for the sales engineering team here at Decisions, and I'll be host today for you all, along with some of the colleagues from my team that I have on the call. Throughout this session, please feel free to ask your questions through chat, or you can unmute yourself and talk to us directly. And we usually start with the pre-submitted questions. I'm going to check the chat if we have received any, or if we don't have any, I would suggest our attendees to kind of post their questions if they have any, so we can address them accordingly. And I see that we don't have any submitted questions, which is totally okay. Okay, we have one question. Soap services and containers. So the question is from an anonymous attendee. It says, do you have any workarounds using soap services in containers? Can you elaborate that a bit, what you're trying to achieve using soap services? And at the same time, I would like to, while you were kind of giving more context around that, the overall use of APIs remains the same. We can create REST and SOAP services through decisions and make calls to them, and so on. So we'll wait on that. But in the meantime, till we create integration with external and containerized deployment decisions. So that question we'll have to route to our support team, because I do not work on the containerized version or the deployment of decisions yet. So we will get that answered through our support group to you. If you can drop in your email or something, I can also follow up and send you an email with the answer to that question direct to you. So whichever works the best, you can let us know through the chat. Submit the ticket. Okay. And can you also provide me your email address or some sort of contact that I can get back to you with the answer to that question? I'll keep a check on the chat while you submit that. In the meantime, because we don't have any pre-submitted question, and if we have any question, we can always, drop in the chat. What I'm going to do now is we will try to build a form and look at how we can change the icons within the form. And that was one of the questions that was asked in one of the sessions before, that if they want to change the label or something on that form, like for example, the color of it, depending on some actions that are being taken. So we will quickly look at that, how we can achieve that in one of the ways. And as I said, if you have any questions, please free to drop in the chat. This is something that I'm just trying to take you through to understand how we can interact with forms and icons on the forms. So I'm going to start by creating a form, and we're going to call it change icon form. And hit create, it takes us to our form designer. I'm going to drag a button, a quick label. Here we will say applicant details. So in a typical form where we would want to track or receive some information about the user, there will be different sections. And we would want to show them which section has been completed, which is still in the process. So this is the use case that can be used in those sort of situations. So I'm going to drop in some details here. For example, the name of the applicant. And we would also take in, let's say, their address. And we can take as much information as we want, depending on what we're trying to do. But I'm just keeping it simple with these couple of text boxes here. And we would also have one checkbox so that the user can kind of confirm that they have completed the work or submitting the form, the details that are required. So what I've done is I've just taken in some user controls, which are text box and a drop checkbox here. And we would also use an image now, because that's the control we would want to change when this form has been filled. So we can kind of give some sort of a graphical indication that this section is complete, and then we can move on to the next one. So I'm going to drag and drop this form control called image, and we're going to give it a data name. So we're going to call it, let's say, icon. Now, you can see that we can define a static image by clicking this button, but then it would remain the same every time we interact with this form. But if I'm defining it as a data name, I will have the ability to change this image on runtime. So we're going to use the data name and call that icon. And now I'm going to define some data flows. And as you would already know, that in decisions, when we are trying to talk between different form controls, we can do that using different ways. And we have active form controls, and you can create one here. We also have the legacy ones, which are dedicated to the visibility rules, the validation rules, and the outcome and the data flows. So I'm going to use something called as data flows. And I'm going to give it a name. Let's say I'm going to call it change icon flow, so that when something happens on this form, this icon changes automatically. I'm going to click on pick or create, and we will create this data flow, and decisions will take us into the workflow designer. Now, what we would want to do is we will check if the details that the user is trying to interact or provide are marked completed. If yes, then we will make that section as green or something. So I would need a rule here, which will check for that Boolean value. So I'm going to drag and drop this rule. And we're going to create this. And we will call it check status rule. I'm going to create and get inside this rule so that I can define on what criteria do I say that this rule should run true. So I'm going to set up the input here, and we will say completed status. And I'm going to define it as a Boolean, because we are taking that as input from the user if the form section is complete. And here we would say if the completed status is true, this rule will give us a true path. And if it's false, then we're not going to update that icon. It's going to remain the same how it was when that form was opened the first time. So let's go ahead and save this and come back into our flow, which we are writing. So you can see that it would require this status, which will basically come from the checkbox which we have. So let's go ahead and define that. We'll call it completed status. And this is going to be a Boolean value. So I'm going to hit save. And the next thing we will do is we will tell that particular variable which is holding that image, that what image do we want to pass into that. So I'm going to use this step called create data and connect it to the true path. Now I'm going to define a variable here or an input, and we're going to call it icon. And I'm going to select that as byte, which will be, image is nothing but like a list of bytes or array of bytes. And it'll ask me to give this an icon. So I can use the icon which I have, which would be black by default. And we would also want, okay, it'll be green actually. So let me drag and drop that one more time. So I'm going to copy that and have one more create data so that when it's not completed, it shows us the black icon. So I'm going to drag and drop the black icon and map that to my create data step. So both of these create data steps would be passing an icon as a result or the outcome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect that to the end step. And on the end step, I will define that a give out icon as the result of this particular data flow that we have. So we have our input, which is basically checking if the status is complete for that section. And if it is complete, then we're going to update the image accordingly. And we will map the completed status input here, done. And we'll go ahead and save it. So now when we come back, I update the inputs. It's going to ask me two things. One is the input, which is basically going to be the control, which is marked completed, which is a checkbox here. I click OK. And it's also going to ask me the output. So in this, we will give the same name as we had defined. I think it was icon, I guess, and we'll say OK. So we'll quickly check if it's actually icon. So you can see that we have defined the data name as name icon, and this is our checkbox. We can add style sheets if we want, just by click of a button, depending on what we are trying to achieve here. Also give name to our form. We will just call it applicant information form. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and save my form so that I can use it in the workflow, which will run. So I'm going to create a flow here, and we're going to call it change icon demo flow and hit create. Now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to use that form which we just created and embed that in our workflow here. And just pick that form which we just created. It's going to be change icon form, and I'm going to select pick and connect it to the end path. So you would see there are some validations. This form is asking, looking for these inputs, but since we'll be providing those inputs on runtime, so we can just go ahead and ignore these inputs. And finally, we can go ahead and debug our flow to see what happens. So when we debug this flow, we're going to see this form that has the section about the applicant details. And you can see that right now the icon is black by default. But if I go ahead and provide some information, and I go ahead and mark that as complete, what happens is the image changes to green. So similarly, we can also save this image as an input in the database, so that if we have the revisiting users who want to continue with their form, so they would be seeing that this section is already completed, and it'll show them what are the pending sections of the main form. And this becomes a very handy application when we are working on a form that has different tabs, or a process which has different forms, sequence of forms in that. We can keep track of what's happening and indicate to the user graphically that what's happening. So, and this is all dynamic. So if I uncheck that, it's going to turn back to black. If I turn it complete, it's going to show us green sign. So this is what I wanted to show, because there was a question one of the sessions back, that how can I change the label? So I'm not sure how we can change the color of the label on the runtime, but we can definitely have that label as an icon. Maybe this applicant details that you see right now in black, it can be an actual image which would turn green if I select something like mark completed. And for that to happen, this has to be an image, like how we're doing here. So this was a quick tutorial or a demonstration of how we can change icons on our form, which I wanted to quickly talk about. And I'm going to go back into the chat and see if we have any more questions. So do we have any questions from the panelists or the attendees on the call today? Yeah, no, Sabrina, I was just asking if we have any more questions from the panelists or the attendees on the call today. Okay, I see there are no further questions. We'll keep it open for a couple of more minutes if anybody comes up with a question. If not, we can wrap today's session earlier. I think it was a short one today. Sabrina, if you don't have any questions, I think we can wind it up.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so let's stop sharing. And thanks everyone who joined in. I hope you had some learning today. Okay.
Thank you, Akshay.
Yeah. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.